Denver is about to restrict which migrants can come into the city's shelters. A recount loss for the Secretary of State. Fellow Democrats reject her plan to limit ballot recounts. The Rockies will keep pouring beers into the 8th inning. Hey, why did that old 7th inning limit exist anyway?
The only thing that sobers people up is time.
If Coloradans are getting desensitized to wildfire danger warnings, maybe it's time to change them. And the mystery of the mascot spotted at the state capitol, observing a silent prayer, as a mascot does, tonight on Next. Denver may begin turning away many migrants from shelters. It's because the city can't get federal funding for helping migrants who are not in the official immigration process. Our Angelina McCall's been following this impact for a couple of months now. Recent change this afternoon.
Yeah, recent change just announced this afternoon, Kyle. And like you mentioned, this does come down to funding and a new requirement for federal dollars. The city cannot front the costs alone, they say. And when we talk about city-run shelters, this is much of what they look like, which is simply most people staying in hotel-turned shelters. So far, the city has spent over $12 million, but moving forward, Denver says it needs federal funding and reimbursement. However, the federal government has put a requirement that they'll only help with funding if migrants are known to immigration. So the only people who will be sheltered are those who went through a port of entry when they crossed the border, or those who have already initiated the asylum process once they got here.
So I think anytime that decisions are made within the city that are impacting people and vulnerable populations, it is a tough decision to make. Ultimately, the decision came as a result of the limitations of funding. It really does boil down to the fact that it is not a sustainable effort in Denver to be able to support all migrants coming in from our southern border.
For those who have not started the process within the immigration system, they will not be able to be sheltered for newly arrived migrants once they start arriving past May 8th. The city says it would still like to help those who are unable to access shelter with other services.
And this presents an opportunity, Angelina, to explain to people how the system works in terms of getting into the asylum process. So folks can come to the border, go to an official port of entry, and they can say, I'm looking for asylum. They also are allowed to cross without permission, and then the first time they see an immigration official say, I am here for asylum. Those are both allowed routes. It's a little bit more complicated once they get to the interior of the country.
Yeah, it's more difficult to actually get into the asylum system and initiate your case once you're already here. It is easier to do so at the border, and I'm hearing that it's taking months, for instance, to get what's called an alien registration number, also known as an A number. That is the number specifically tied to funding from the federal government that the city says that they need to basically get reimbursed for cost for any individual migrant. And so when it comes to that A number, it could take several months to actually receive that once you're actually here in Denver, and that is also causing complications.
All right. I know you'll stay on. Thank you, Angelina McCall. An 11-year-old is facing 2 felony charges for bringing a weapon into a Denver charter school last week. And if you're wondering why you did not hear about this case, you're not alone, because we only learned about it through a public records request. A spokeswoman for the charter told us they didn't tell parents about it either. A lot of the details are still under wraps because juvenile criminal cases are confidential, but multiple sources tell us the student is accused of bringing a knife to a school. Anytime a student's arrested and charged with a crime, prosecutors will send a letter to the school district. In this case, the incident happened at a DSST charter school, Green Valley Ranch Middle School. Denver Public Schools authorizes that charter, so DPS got the notification. The 11-year-old student is charged with felony menacing and possession of a weapon on school grounds, also a felony. Documents from prosecutors indicate that 10 students associated with DPS have been charged with possessing a weapon at school since the start of this school year. There's a sweeping elections bill just introduced in the state Senate this week that would make a number of changes to how we run elections, including expanding automatic voter registration to people who are tribal members in Colorado and requiring candidates to disclose their personal income. The Democrats who control the state legislature have denied Democratic Secretary of State Jena Griswold a key change that she wanted included in the bill. Griswold wanted to make it harder for losing candidates to request a recount. Right now, ballots are automatically recounted when the margin of victory is less than 0.5% of the leading candidate's total. But any candidate, as we've talked about here before, any candidate can request a recount for a race with a larger margin. They just have to pay for it themselves. So, for example, former Mesa County Clerk, famous election denier Tina Peters, she paid more than $250,000 for a recount after she got smoked in her Secretary of State primary by more than 88,000 votes. She thought it was rigged. The recount said that she gained 13 votes. Griswold wanted to ban recounts in races that are not close and to only allow those discretionary recounts in races that have a margin of victory under 2%. Democratic Senate President Stephen Fenberg told our partners at Colorado Politics he took out Griswold's proposal to block some recounts because he was worried about feeding into election denial conspiracies. Election deniers and far-right extremists do have a particular fixation on Griswold. 52-year-old Kirk Wirtz was just convicted yesterday on one count of retaliation against an elected official. It was a result of a call he made to Griswold's office last June. He threatened to, quote, the angel of death was coming for her. Wirtz told investigators he's affiliated with the Oath Keepers, wasn't arrested until a month later. He's due to be sentenced on Monday. Wirtz is the second person convicted of threats against Secretary Griswold. Last year, a man from Nebraska pleaded guilty to making death threats against her on social media. Democrats at the state capitol have sent 2 more gun bills to the governor's desk, one with some pretty significant changes. This week, the state legislature signed off on 2 bills out of the package of Democrat-sponsored gun bills. One would require a 3-day waiting period for firearm purchases. A bill removing some liability protections for gun manufacturers is also going to the governor, but with some pretty big changes. The legislature removed provisions requiring gun manufacturers to avoid selling to children, criminals, or people who might hurt themselves or others. The governor's office told the Colorado Sun that he had a say in making those changes. Looks like they were made to fend off a veto, and the governor is now likely to sign off on those gun bills. The Colorado Rockies home opener this year was 51 minutes speedier than last year's. Faster games means fans have less time to spend money at concession stands, specifically on very expensive beers. The Rockies announced today they are going to join other teams in extending alcohol sales through the 8th inning. A state legislator tells our Marshall Zellinger he's going to extend the reach of his office to see if they might be able to regulate that.
If you are in need of assistance,
the Colorado Rockies are traveling today. The concessions are empty. But when they're back at Coors on Monday night, concessions that normally closed after the 7th inning will be open through the 8th. The Rockies announced on social media that because of new Major League Baseball rule changes, alcohol sales will be extended through the 8th inning. Pitchers and batters now have a clock requiring them to be ready faster, and the stats show it is working. Last year, through the first 7 home games, all but 2 Rockies games were longer than 3 hours. The shortest, 2:48. So far this year, the longest is 2:47, and the shortest, amazingly, 2 hours, 14 minutes. Extending last call in Coors Field means more chances to drink and, let's be honest, sell beer.
We could have some reasonable regulations on when liquor sales need to end before the end of an event.
Democratic State Senator Kevin Priola, who was behind to-go alcohol during the start of COVID, is not a fan of fans drinking later at Rockies games.
I sit on the Opioid and Other Substances Use Committee, and I think it's something we might take a look at this year, along with substance-free seating.
Priola had a bill die earlier this year that would have required 4% of a venue's seating to be substance-free. Let's just say he's not making friends with the sports teams.
I already have my tickets, so.
If someone's going to a Rockies game, we want to make sure that they plan for a safe way to get there and a safe way to get home.
Fran Lanzer is the executive director of Mothers Against Drunk Driving, which does not normally take a position on alcohol sales to people older than 21.
If people are 21 and older, they're being safe and responsible. We're not against drinking. That is a private choice. When you choose to drink and then get behind the wheel of an automobile, then it becomes a public safety concern.
The Denver Broncos cut off alcohol sales at the end of the 3rd quarter. The Colorado Avalanche at the start of the 3rd period. The Denver Nuggets at the start of the 4th quarter. Policies differ by team and state. For example, the New York Jets and New York Giants cut off alcohol sales just after halftime.
One thing we hear a lot about is that, well, we'll have more time to sober up. And the science just doesn't support that. If someone is above 0.08 at the end of the 7th inning or at the end of the 8th inning, they're not going to be safe to drive at the end of the game.
There is no law or policy that restricts the time alcohol can be sold until. I even checked the liquor license with Coors and the lease agreement with the Rockies. This is from the lease agreement, by the way. Quote, the Rockies will determine the price and quality of the product sold by the concessionaire.
No.
So let's talk about the price.
Not the quality.
Price and quality. I got to get through price.
Yeah.
I want to do a story on why the price can be what... I know why the price can be what it is at venues because I just read it from the contract. Let's talk about the quality.
Yeah. Oh, Oh, you know what? Listen, this could be an easy place to drag somebody, but I'm not going to, because there's a microbrewery there at Coors Field, the Sandlot. The quality of beer at Coors Field is as good or better than at any major league ballpark out there. So I have no complaints about the quality. The price,
To be determined in a future story.
TBD. All right, Marshall, thank you.
We all know Colorado's red flag warnings, days when we're primed to burn. But what do they really mean?
So right now, red flag warnings is a binary decision-making process.
A group of meteorologists is talking about changes to make the warnings more clear. And a quiet moment of prayer at the state capitol involving a giant neon pink bear. That's next.
The Front Range clear out to Kansas is under a red flag warning today. We hear those words ever more often because of increasing fire danger. Colorado's meteorologists are looking at whether those warnings should change as a result. Our Luis De Leon is not a meteorologist, which just means that he can explain this in terms that we can understand.
You know, we've had the same red flag criteria for a couple decades or more now.
As first responders and researchers filled a ballroom in Fort Collins for the Colorado Wildland Fire Conference, the ideas were sparking.
To show you things that we have access to that we can look at.
Like from National Weather Service meteorologist Scott Stearns, who presented a different way of determining red flag warnings. Right now, Stearns explained a lot of things need to happen at once to issue a red flag warning. Winds have to be at or above 25 mile per hour gusts. Relative humidity has to be at or below 15%. Fuels have to be considered critical, and those conditions have to be met for 3 hours or more during the day. But Stearns believes that could be looked at differently.
We like to evaluate them all as one piece. How do they combine correctly? Maybe the RH isn't quite as low as 15%, but the temperature is extremely high and the winds are high, and so that could lead to dangerous fire weather conditions. Even though you may have strong winds, the RH may not be there, the fuels may not be quite completely critical.
Taking all of that into account is something he feels could be an efficient way of looking at when to issue those warnings.
Maybe one day that we would have issued before, we don't issue now, or vice versa.
The sheer amount of red flag warnings issued in a year can vary, depending on where you live. Let's take Boulder, for instance. According to data from the National Weather Service there, 57 red flag warnings have been issued in all of their forecast areas since the start of this year. That's actually down compared to the same time last year when 78 warnings were issued.
It should be the right combination of those three factors.
Stearns hopes new analysis sparks improvement.
Making sure that we're actually warning folks of problematic fire weather days, not just a couple criteria that are listed in a book.
Stearns says himself and just a few others have really been looking at these different ways to issue the warnings just in their forecast office for now. Kyle, he says his proposal will actually have to go through feedback and a few other hurdles before actually being considered.
Speaking of consideration, meteorologist Luis De Leon has got a nice little ring to it.
Right. Well, you know, I'm not good at math. That's why I'm a journalist.
You thought about it, though. You thought about becoming a meteorologist.
It was the way I got into broadcast media in general. But, you know, I couldn't even test into calculus in college. Here we are.
Took you out at the knees. You were not the first. You won't be the last. Luis, thank you.
Okay, Luis, not going for my job. Thank you very much. Look at the red flag warning. Yes, indeed, the I-25 corridor off to the eastern plains into Nebraska and Kansas for about the next hour and a half until 8 o'clock tonight. We've seen incredibly strong winds out there. Low humidity values just so dry. Currently, we're looking at 20 to 30 mile per hour wind gusts stretching across the eastern plains, but still pretty breezy up into the mountains and through the foothills. This afternoon was a warm one. Another day at 80 degrees here in the Denver area, 90s around Ray, Burlington, Lamar, too. Even up into the high country, it was a mild afternoon with 60s in Kremling, Eagle, and through Gunnison. Tonight, the cloud cover starting to push in, maybe a couple little breaks with some sunshine trying to peek through, but we're gearing up for some much needed rain and possibly some snowfall around here, too. Center of low pressure anchored off to the northwest. There's that cold front that's going to push into Colorado overnight into tomorrow, and that is going to drop off our temperatures dramatically. Just you wait. Tomorrow will feel a little bit more like winter. As we look ahead through early tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., you'll wake up to a bit of rain around the urban corridor. And then by the later evening hours, once those temperatures have really cooled off, some snowfall mixing in. Because it has been so mild, I'm really not looking at a ton of accumulation here in the city, but winter weather advisory is stretching across the high country areas for about 4 to 8, 4 to 10 inches around the San Juans, 6 to 12. Tomorrow temperatures in the 40s, but we will cool off fast, especially throughout the afternoon. Look at this 7-day forecast. A quick little flurry Saturday. Storm moves out in the 60s and 70s, return early next week.
Anybody recognize this giant neon bear? Track down the mystery mascot that crashed a religious celebration at the state capitol. Next. State legislature regularly hosts community groups and organizations for special recognition at the Capitol. They do this every single day, and often they bring in more than one at a time, which sometimes can be hilariously wonderful. So take yesterday. Members of the Sikh community gathered at the Capitol, where Governor Polis signed a proclamation declaring April as Sikh Awareness and Appreciation Month. That's really cool. And they started the day off with a prayer on the House floor. It was the Sikhs right next to a giant pink and yellow bear mascot, which, as you'll note, is very respectfully joining them in prayer, like head bowed, hands clasped and all. Apparently, that's because yesterday also celebrated the Scientific and Cultural Facilities District. The neon bear is their mascot and just kind of got rolled up in the prayer. Let's hear it for the mascot, though. Silent prayer or anything else is kind of its jam, and it was just right there next to the Sikhs. That got us talking about obscure local mascots. Big time credit to the OGs who were around in the 1990s and remember the 9 News mascot, Nino the Dino, the purple dinosaur mascot. In the early days of Next, if you were around at the very beginning, you might even remember that Steve Steger donned the costume. He said it didn't smell great. Feedback's next. A woman who played a key role in bringing you this newscast is saying farewell to 9 News today, and we wanted to mention it. While you might know her name, you are probably here watching Next because our news director, Megan Jurgemeyer, was a fearless advocate for the kind of journalism that we do here, even when it made some very powerful people mad. MJ came to 9 News a decade ago. She became our news director in 2019, so right before the pandemic and the social justice protests and all of the rapid changes in our community and world. So what does a news director do, you say? Well, news director does a lot. As it related to Next, MJ took the phone calls from politicians angry with our coverage and would ask them, well, was it accurate? When we suggested holding a 13-candidate mayoral debate, it was MJ who said, all right, let's go find a big stage. Our goal every night is to tell you the truth and to ask uncomfortable questions of people in power, no matter who gets mad about it, because that's what you deserve. Megan Jurgemeyer has had our back every time, which meant that she has had your back every time. Note from Jeff tonight, who says, I understand the debate about the Coors Field alcohol sales cutoff, but the stadium's surrounded by Lodo, and the bars stay open till 2, so isn't this discussion futile? I get what you're saying, Jeff, that some people are just going from the game to the bars, but we've all been at Coors and watched somebody stumble out to the parking lot and realize with trepidation, oh, that person thinks that they can drive. That's certainly scary business. We'll see you next time.